tonight's programme talking about population and the rising population in particular in the UK over the next few years.
Yeah, the UK is on course to overtake Germany as Europe's largest country, according to the Office for National Statistics. It says our population is likely to jump by almost 10 million over the next 25 years, and that's equivalent to the current population of Sweden. More than 2/3 of the projected rise from almost 65 million in mid-2004 to over 74 million in 2039 will be down to future net migration and the children subsequently born to migrants.
The ONS also says we have an ageing population in the UK, and by 2039, more than 1 in 12 will be over the age of 80, which will cause its own problems. Paul Vickers, the head of population services at the ONS, spoke to 5Live's Peter Allen earlier and explained what they'd found.
The two things that come quite clearly out of today's figures are one, that we're actually got a population that's growing and a population that's ageing. And over the next 25 years, we really see the baby boomers who are now between 44 and 54 going into the 69 to 79-year-old age band. So we see a lot more people in that in that older age band. We've got increases in the population of people aged 75 and over of 90%, of 89%. And we've actually got we will have 6 times more centenarians in 2039.
You have to make assumptions that the increase in our age, sort of in the numbers of years we survive, that increase will go on increasing. You make that assumption, do you?
We make that. We make some mortality judgments and assumptions, and they are fed in through to our figures so that we can actually estimate the number of people that are going to be that will die over that period. But that does take into account the growing population that we have in those age bands as well.
Now, assumed net migration accounts for 51% of that projected increase. And that there'll be presumably quite often younger people. So I'm surprised. What happens to the kind of average? You say, despite that, we're left with a lot of a predominantly old population, are we?
Yes. When you look at the distribution of ages, you see that the proportion of older people, pensionable ages, goes up by 33%. But actually, the proportion of people of working age only goes up by 11%. So the average age as a whole in the population is going to go up. At the moment, it's 40 years exactly, but by 2039, it will be 42.9 years.
So what does all this mean for housing, hospitals, schools and our infrastructure? Can we cope with the population rising at this rate? On the other hand, with an increasingly ageing population, can we cope without these extra people working to support them? So, as Anne has said, for the rest of the programme, we're going to look at the implications, positive and negative here of this population growth. Let us know what you think, 85058. Get in touch via social media at BBC 5 Live. Join the debate. A lot of guests to talk to. First of all, though, let's just bring in Professor Jane Falkingham, Director of the Centre for Population Change at the University of Southampton. Hello, Jane.
Good evening. Just
put some context on this for us, first of all, to set the parameters here. Why is this happening?
Well, I think Paul Vickers from ONS summed it up quite well, that we've got both a growing population, which means we've got more people being born than dying, and we also have increasing net migration as well. So about 50% of the growth of the population is going to come from migration, and about 50% is actually going to come from what we call natural increase. Now, obviously, the people who...
Hello, Jane. I think on an issue about population, we've just lost lost one.
She's back.
Jane, are you there?
Yeah, sorry.
Just continue your point. You were cut off a few seconds ago.
Right, sorry about that.
Right.
Yeah, so we're about 50% of our growth in the population is going to come from migration, and about 50% of the growth of the population is going to come from an excess of births over deaths.
Yeah.
However, the migrants are quite young, so actually those migrants are contributing to that excess of births over deaths.
Yeah, I mean, that's key to this, isn't it, when it comes to the migrants? I guess in the future, the government's issue is going to be to ensure that they're paying more in taxes than they're costing in public services. A lot of people have been texting in today, predictably, probably you could say, saying, look, the country's full, etc., etc., etc. But, there are two ways of looking at this, aren't there? Because Germany's population is declining and it's said they're going to have difficulties in the long term.
That's right. Germany's population is actually declining in size. And some of the regions of Germany, some of the rural areas are declining really rapidly. At the same time, they've got ageing populations. So that's one of the reasons, really, I think, why the German government's been so open to taking so many of the current migrants from the Middle Eastern crisis.
Just before we bring in everyone else, Jane, one of the issues that the ONS says is critical for releasing this report is saying the government needs to prepare policymakers for future demands. So are we prepared? Are we well prepared to deal with this increase in population? Has it taken us by surprise?
No, it shouldn't really be taking us by that much surprise, although the numbers are a little bit higher than the previous estimates that ONS put out 2 years ago. They're not that much higher. So we already knew that we were forecast to grow to a population of around 70 million in the next 12 to 15 years. It's going to come a little bit faster, but not that much faster.
OK, Jane, for now, thanks very much. Do join in, though, for the rest of the debate.
Sure.
Just jump in when you want.
Yeah, let's bring in the rest of our guests. Trevor Phillips is a former chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission and a fellow at the Migration Policy Institute. Professor Steve Bown is a board member at the sustainability charity Population Matters. Matt Pollard's director of Migration Watch UK, which campaigns for tighter immigration controls. And Andy Silvester is the head of campaigns at the Institute of Directors. Good evening, all.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Before we get into this, I'd like you just to each answer a question with just a one-word answer for me, just to give people an idea what direction you come at this from. When we talk about this very substantial rise in population, 10 million over the next 25 years, the question is a yes or no one. Do you think as a country we can cope with that? Trevor Phillips?
Yep.
Professor Steve Bown?
No.
Matt Pollard?
No.
And Andy Silvester?
Yes.
OK. Trevor Phillips, we'll go back to the start. And you said yes. Why do you think that we are geared up and able to deal with these extra numbers?
Well, let's look at our history. Let's just look at the most densely populated part of the country, which is London, where the population has increased from 6.5 million to 8.6 million in the past 20 years. That's an increase of 25%. House prices are high. There are some difficulties with infrastructure, but it is still the wealthiest part of the country. It is still the growingest part of the country, and actually the place where everybody still wants to go. So people who say we can't cope with it need to look at how we actually have dealt with it. And that's the story, that's always been the story. This is not to say there are no difficulties, but to start running around like chicken licking, saying sky is falling in, is just a sure way to make sure that actually it turns into a shambles on the properly planned way to sustain our economy.
OK, I heard somebody who was itching to come in then. Who was that?
Yeah, that was me, yes. I mean, if we take the example of London, it's often portrayed as a successful city, but it actually has a huge exodus of people to the rest of the country every year. So 50, 60,000 people leave London every year precisely because the population is growing so rapidly, the housing can't respond, and there's too many people chasing too few homes. Look,
well, there's churn, but we still have an increase in population in London. There are more people coming to London than leaving it.
Yeah, from abroad. Absolutely, all from abroad.
No, not just from abroad.
No, the net increase
you know
is...
that.
No, net increase is all from abroad.
OK, Matt and Trevor, there was another voice came in there. Who was that?
This was me, Stephen Bown.
OK, Stephen, you are on the same wavelength as Matt, really. You don't think this is sustainable. Why not?
Well, we have to stand back and look at the whole situation. This country is bursting at the seams in terms of the resources available. We're consuming more and we have more and more consumers. We're relying more on all sorts of things from outside the country, and we're just not in a sustainable situation. The whole world, overall, the population is still going up. We cannot rely indefinitely that we'll get everything we want from other countries. They're going to want things for themselves. So we have to stand back and just see what's happening to the environment. Can we sustain our way of life with the vast increase in numbers?
OK. Andy Silvester, as we said, you're from the Institute of Directors. So, and we touched on, Professor Jane Falkingham touched on Germany as an example. It's somewhere I went where we covered this topic on R5Live a few months ago, and they are particularly keen to take in migrants because they've got a real problem with their working age population. How would we apply that model to this country?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. It is a fair comparison, an interesting and revealing one. But I don't want to sound too much like the Chancellor because, if nothing else, the last 2 weeks proves he isn't perfect on everything. But, good public services ultimately are delivered via the medium of taxation. Taxation relies on a growing economy. Now, unless we have people coming into the country, unless we have more working age people in the economy, that will fall. The tax base will fall. With an ageing population, demands on public services will go up. So we have to fill that gap somehow. And the only way we have a growing economy is if we have the people and, more importantly, the skills to deliver a growing economy for the 21st century. Right now, we've got about half of IOD members who are predominantly small to medium enterprise owners, are employing people from abroad. Only 4% say that has anything to do with cost. The rest, it's about filling skills gaps. And while there are very good answers that we absolutely need to upskill people coming through the education system right now, and make sure that people coming through the British education system are ready for the 21st century workplace, that doesn't change the fact that if we want to grow the economy and want to have sustainable public finances, we need to have people in jobs delivering growth and delivering taxation so that we can afford to then pay for the public services of this increased population.
Okay,
Sorry, the problem with that argument from Andy is that just immigrants grow old too. So it's just a Ponzi scheme. If you're bringing in more working age people, they retire, and you have to bring in ever more just to try and stay still.
Okay, I tell you what, let's pause for a couple of texts because people are getting in touch all the time. This one here says, on population increase, it's dead simple. Compared to China and Germany, our land mass is tiny. So despite all the arguments about migrant contribution, living in the UK becomes a misery for us. Villages are torn up, roads and school misery, lifestyle and heritage ruin, says this one text.
I would just come in there and look at the population density of the UK, and I think we rank somewhere around 50th in the world, and there's plenty of other countries which have much higher population densities than we do, including European countries.
Except most migrants go to England, and so England is a relative comparison. And
England is near the top of the list.
It's very near the top of the list.
Of England.
May I make a point?
Trevor Phillips, go on.
The point that's just been made is exactly right. We're actually not that far. We're pretty much like Germany when it comes to population density. And I think Stephen, isn't it? He's quite right. Most migrants come to England, and that's actually the problem. It's not that this country, the United Kingdom, by the way, is full. It is to do with the balance. At the moment, Scotland, which, let's remind ourselves, is still part of the United Kingdom, is actually one of the least dense parts of the entire Europe. It has 67 people per square kilometre, which is less than, I think, almost every big country except Bulgaria. So actually, we haven't got a problem with land.
But Trevor, you can't just bring in a swathe of people and put them in a field and say that's it for the future. There has to be infrastructure, there has to be employment and all kinds of things, doesn't there?
That's the point. That is the point I made earlier on. The issue for us is not to do with whether we can cope with it. We need to, as has been made clear from the IOD. We've got to have people. And there was an item on the news just a moment ago about house builders saying we cannot build houses fast enough because we haven't got people with the skills. Well, we've got to have these people. So the answer here is not to argue about, oh gosh, can we deal with it? It is how do we manage it? How do we distribute people? How do we build infrastructure?
Okay,
that's the key.
I want to put this
how do we find the resources for all this infrastructure?
Steve Bown and Matt Pollard, I want to just put this to you.
Yes.
If we are looking towards the future, and we've already mentioned that Germany, Italy and Spain, their populations are declining, and they may face problems in working age population in years to come. If not for immigrants coming to this country and perhaps supporting all these elderly people that we know are going to exist in 25 years' time, where would you find those people in the UK to support the country in future?
If I may,
I think there is doubt about
whether...
This is Steve.
Yes, go on, Steve. Matt,
I think there is doubt about whether we need so many more young people to look after the older ones. Just look at how many unemployed young people there are in this country at present. Why can't they do the jobs? Isn't it not better to train those people?
Is it that simple?
Well, it's one aspect that needs to be considered. We have done our own research on whether we need extra people to look after the old bones, and in fact it seems unlikely that we do. Yeah. First of all, people, although they're living longer, the time for taking one's pension is creeping up. They are more healthy in older age, and technology often helps that you don't need so much assistance from human.
Okay, so somebody groaned. Somebody actually groaned as Steve made that point. Who was that? You, Trevor, or you, Andy?
It was me, the IOD.
Right, Andy. Sorry, Andy Silvester. This is like playing hide and seek in the dark, isn't it? Identify the voice. But Andy Silvester from the Institute of Directors. Just answer that point that Steve Bown made there.
Radio programme's too full. That's the problem. No, the Office for Budget Responsibility say that without immigration, zero net migration, we'd have basically a debt to GDP ratio in this country of 40% higher than we have now, and it's already pretty high, dangerously high, in fact. So the idea that we don't need these young people and that everything will be fine, and we'll just have. I absolutely take the point that we need to upskill young people, but that doesn't change the fact. That are coming through the British education system, that doesn't change the fact that the education system takes a long time to filter through. Any policy change in education, if you start teaching a 5-year-old now, it's going to be an awfully long time until they're a 25-year-old coder in the tech economy. So I do struggle with the idea that we can possibly get by without young people coming to the economy. And previously,
I do agree that we need some skilled people, particularly.
This is Matt from Migration Watch.
Yes, Matt, go on.
Can I just say, it's quite hard earlier when you gave the yes or no option, because of course it is more nuanced than that. And all we're saying is that the current high rates of population growth from high immigration is not ideal. It doesn't mean we shouldn't have any immigration. It doesn't mean we shouldn't bring in some people for skill shortages. But it's about getting that balance right. And my point is there's no benefit to the existing residents of the UK from having such rapid population growth. And the point is as well, is it's probably going to be worse than the ONS have outlined today, because they're using an assumption that net migration would be 185,000. Well, we know from the latest figures that it's actually 330,000. So if nothing changed as of today, we're looking at even more rapid population growth.
And Trevor Phillips, on that point, we've been told that the population is going to grow 9.7 million over 25 years. That is an interesting point from Matt Pollard. Just because we've been told that, is that necessarily a good thing? Not even arguing whether migration's good or not. Just that point of 9.7 million. Can it be too much? Could 5 million be the perfect target for this country, if you see what I mean?
10 million means 10 more Birminghams.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't go along with that terrible slight on Birmingham. I think another Birmingham wouldn't be a bad thing. I love Birmingham. But
no,
the point
nothing
is,
wrong with Birmingham, but what about having 10 more of them?
I'm joking. My point is that actually our population has risen quite dramatically over the last century. I made the point about London. Actually, we can cope with these things if we plan them properly. I, by the way, agree with Matt Pollard that the key point here is it is to do with balance, and there is an argument about pace to be had. But the question about where you settle that balance depends on how much effort you want to make.
Right.
And I go along with Andy that actually we really have no choice economically but to put our backs into dealing with the fact that we need more people. And if I may make just one other point.
OK, just briefly, if you would, Trevor. I just want to bring
briefly,
Professor Jane Falkingham back in.
Well, just very briefly, the people who are complaining about this, if I may say so, I think you have a point, but you've got the wrong point. The real issue that the country is going to have to deal with is that actually, we don't have 250,000 people coming. We've got 500,000. The 250,000 is net. 500,000 people a year of very different kinds, different languages and so on, are changing who we are.
Professor
That's
Jane
the real issue to deal with.
Falkingham, Director of the Centre for Population Change at the University of Southampton. Just taking a very small sidestep, one thing which is always interesting to note when we discuss this topic is that it's enormously divisive, isn't it? Hugely
Absolutely.
so. Why is that?
Well, I think that people get concerned about population change for a whole variety of different reasons. One is the changing structure of our society. So I think a really good point's just been made about the people coming in with different languages, different cultures, how they're assimilating, how it's changing local neighbourhoods. I think also on a global level, population change is also quite controversial in terms of should we be telling people how many children to have. We've just heard about the Chinese one-child policy being reversed. What are the implications of that for global population growth? So people always have views on it, but actually it's quite certain that we're going to change, the population of the UK is going to grow at least over the next 5 to 10 years. Very little we can do to change that, even if we were to introduce tighter migration controls. So actually what we need to do is start planning for those changes. The ageing of the population is going to happen.
Okay.
Those people born in the 1960s are alive now. So they're all going to become older.
We are almost out of time, but Matt Pollard, I just want you to very briefly, if you could respond to what Professor Jane Falkingham said there, is that this is inevitable, even if you do have tighter immigration controls.
Well, the ageing population is certainly inevitable because immigration isn't a solution to that. But, I mean, immigration controls do work. It's about getting the balance right. There's always going to be flows of people into Britain, and we should welcome that. We don't want to be a country where more people want to leave than come to. Of course not. But immigration controls do make a difference, and the government is trying to reduce migration.
Okay, we'll give a final word to, Matt, you were in favour of tighter immigration controls. Just a final brief word then to Andy Silvester, just to balance it out with the other side. Final word to you. I mean, is it something genuinely that we should be concerned about in this country?
Look, there's no question that immigration puts pressure on public services, but, it has a positive impact on the UK economy. If we want to have a thriving economy, we want to have public services that work in the next 20 years, we have to accept the fact that, immigration is a part of that. OK,
thank you all. Thanks for taking part in the debate. Hopefully we've given you a full picture of both sides.
Yep, thanks everyone. Thanks for all your texts as well. We're back tomorrow with Drive. Here's Ellie with a smorgasbord of sport.
Thanks, guys. Well, Bath say he's staying, but the view from Australia is that he's on his way back to Sydney. We'll have the latest in the Sam Burgess saga shortly, and from 7:30, All Blacks legend Andrew Mertens is among Matt Dawson's guests for our Rugby World Cup final preview. Before that, Chelsea are facing an unfair dismissal claim from Eva Carneiro. We'll hear from Paul Scholes on Louis van Gaal's management style. And after 9, you'll hear from 3 times world champion Lewis Hamilton in 5 Live Formula One.
Breaking news and the best live sport. This is BBC 5 Live.
Good evening at 7 o'clock on 5 Live. This is Eleanor Oldroyd. From 7:30 over on 5 Live Sports Extra, you'll be able to hear commentary on the women's all-around final at the World Gymnastics Championships in Glasgow. And on the in-short section of the 5 Live website, just what is